The whole town warned him that opening his cabin door to a young widow could destroy his reputation. But when Elias Turner saw her collapsing in the snow with a baby in her arms and a frightened little boy clinging to her skirt, he made a choice that would change all of their lives. He could have turned away. He could have listened to the whispers waiting for him in town. Instead, he stepped into the freezing. Night opened his gate and said, "You and those children aren't spending another minute out here. I've got a fire, some food, and room enough for all of you." What Elias didn't know was that letting Sarah inside would bring back a part of his heart he thought had died years ago. Stay with Nordic love stories, because this Wild West tale begins with one man's courage and ends with a family, neither of them, expected to find. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to Nordic Love Stories for more emotional stories of love, courage, kindness, and second chances. Winter had arrived early in the Rocky Mountains that year. Snow covered the narrow trails, buried the wooden fences, and turned the wilderness into a silent world of white. 42-year-old Elias Turner lived alone in a small log cabin far beyond the nearest settlement. He had spent years learning how to survive without depending on anyone. His wife had died from illness long ago, leaving behind nothing but memories and an empty chair beside the fireplace. Elias had become a quiet man after that loss. He worked hard, cared for his horses, hunted his own food, and rarely visited town unless supplies were needed. That evening, he had just finished stacking firewood when he noticed something moving near the edge of his property. At first he thought it was a deer. Then the shape stumbled closer. It was a woman. A faded brown coat hung loosely around her shoulders, and a worn blue scarf covered most of her dark hair. A tiny baby was pressed against her chest beneath a blanket, while a 6-year-old boy struggled through the deep snow behind her. Elias immediately noticed how badly they were shaking. The woman reached his fence and stopped. "Please," she whispered, barely able to speak. "We're only looking for somewhere to survive the night." Elias studied her tired face. "What's your name?" "Sarah Miller." Her voice trembled. "My husband died before winter. We were staying with relatives, but they told us we couldn't remain." The little boy stared at Elias with frightened eyes. The baby barely moved beneath the blanket. Elias didn't need another explanation. He looked toward his cabin, where orange firelight shone through the window. "How long have you been walking?" he asked. "Since morning." Elias's expression hardened with concern. "Then you're lucky you reached here before dark." Sarah lowered her eyes. "People in town said a man living alone wouldn't want trouble." Elias removed his hat and walked toward the gate. "People in town talk too much." He opened it wide. "Come inside." Sarah hesitated. "Mr. Turner, I don't want to cause problems." Elias looked at the children. "Neither do I, but I won't watch them freeze." He stepped aside. "I've got room by the fire. Let folks say whatever they want." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in weeks, someone had chosen mercy instead of judgment. Elias carried the little boy across the snow while Sarah followed with the baby. Inside the cabin, warmth immediately surrounded them. Elias added several logs to the fire, heated stew, and found dry clothes for the children. The boy slowly relaxed beside the flames. Sarah watched silently, realizing that the stranger she had feared might be the first person to truly help her. Outside, the wind screamed across the mountains. Inside, a lonely cabin began to feel like the safest place in the world. By sunrise, Sarah had already decided she could not remain in Elias's cabin without giving something in return. While the children slept near the warm fireplace, she quietly prepared breakfast, swept the floor, and repaired a torn shirt she found hanging beside Elias's bed. When Elias returned from feeding the horses, he stopped at the doorway. His cabin, once silent and cold despite the fire, suddenly looked alive. "You didn't need to do any of this," he said. Sarah gave him a small smile. "You gave us shelter. I won't repay that by sitting around doing nothing." Elias looked at her for a moment before nodding. "Then I suppose we'll make a good team." Those simple words became the beginning of something neither of them understood yet. Days turned into weeks. Elias repaired the broken fence while Sarah baked bread from the flour he had stored. She mended blankets, cleaned the cabin, and taught the little boy to read from an old book Elias had kept untouched for years. The boy, Daniel, quickly became attached to Elias. He followed him into the barn, helped feed the horses, and watched closely whenever Elias split logs. The baby, Lily, seemed happiest whenever Elias held her near the fire. Every evening, her laughter filled the cabin, and Elias found himself smiling more than he had in years. Sarah noticed the change, so did Elias, but neither spoke about it. They both carried memories of people they had lost, and neither wanted to risk another heartbreak. Meanwhile, the people in town began talking. When Elias rode into the general store, a rancher named Cole Harper leaned against the counter and smirked. "Heard you're keeping company with a widow these days?" Another man laughed. "Careful, Elias. A lonely man can make foolish decisions." Elias calmly gathered the flour, coffee, medicine, and children's supplies he needed. Then he looked at them. "I found 2 children freezing in the snow. I gave them shelter. If kindness damages my name, I'll live with that." The room became quiet. The shopkeeper lowered his eyes, clearly ashamed. Elias paid for his supplies and left without another word, but his answer traveled through town faster than his horse. Something slowly changed. The next morning, an elderly woman arrived at Elias's cabin with a basket of eggs. A rancher's wife brought warm clothes for the children. Someone left a sack of potatoes beside the porch without saying who had brought it. Sarah was overwhelmed. "Why are people doing this now?" she asked. Elias smiled. Maybe they needed someone to remind them who they could be. As Christmas approached, the cabin became brighter. Sarah hung handmade decorations above the fireplace. Daniel carved wooden stars beside Elias. Lily learned to laugh whenever Elias lifted her into the air. One evening, Sarah stood beside the window watching snow fall over the mountains. Elias came beside her. "You miss your old life?" he asked. Sarah took a slow breath. "I miss who I was before everything went wrong." Elias looked at her gently. "Maybe you don't have to become that woman again." She turned toward him. "What if I don't know who I am anymore?" Elias answered softly. "Then perhaps you can discover her here." Their eyes met. Neither moved. For a moment, the storm outside disappeared. But before either could say more, a distant gunshot echoed from the valley. Elias immediately reached for his coat. A powerful blizzard was approaching, and several families were still trapped miles away. The warmth inside their cabin would soon be needed by more than just one family. The blizzard struck the valley with terrifying force. Snow buried the roads, blocked the mountain passes, and trapped several families in isolated ranches. Elias knew many people were running out of firewood and food, so he saddled his strongest horse and prepared to leave. Sarah grabbed his arm. "You can't go alone in this." Elias looked at her worried face. "Someone has to help them." Sarah shook her head. "Then we'll help them together." For the first time, Elias realized Sarah was no longer the frightened widow who had arrived at his gate. She had become strong again. While Elias traveled through the storm to help the stranded families, Sarah opened the cabin to anyone who reached their door. She cooked their remaining food, wrapped children in blankets, and kept the fire burning through the night. When Elias finally returned, exhausted and covered in snow, he found his cabin filled with neighbors who had nowhere else to go. Sarah rushed toward him. "You're alive." Elias smiled. "You sound surprised." She laughed through tears. "I was terrified." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "I was thinking about you the whole way back." The words left them both silent. When Christmas Eve arrived, the storm finally weakened. Nearly everyone in the valley gathered at the small church. The pastor stood before them and spoke about courage. "There was a time when this town cared more about gossip than mercy," he said. Then one man opened his door to a mother and her children. His kindness reminded all of us what courage truly looks like. Elias lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with praise. Then the pastor asked Sarah to come forward. Several townspeople carried a wooden box into the church. Inside were documents for a small farm on the edge of the valley. The townspeople had repaired the farmhouse, rebuilt its fence, and prepared the land for Sarah and her children. "This belongs to you," the pastor said. Sarah covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I can't accept this." An elderly rancher stepped forward. "You don't owe us anything. We owe you an apology. We watched you struggle when we should have helped." Sarah looked toward Elias. He was the first person who believed we deserved a chance. Daniel ran toward Elias and grabbed his coat. "Are we staying with him?" he asked innocently. Everyone smiled. Elias knelt beside the boy. "That depends on your mother." Sarah slowly walked toward them. "Elias," she whispered, "when I came to your cabin, I thought I was asking for a place to survive the winter. But you gave my children something much greater." Elias stood. "What did I give you?" Sarah reached for his hand. "A home." Elias's eyes filled with emotion. "Sarah, I don't know what tomorrow brings, but if you'll let me, I'd like to spend it with you." Sarah smiled through tears. "You already have my answer." Months later, spring returned to the mountains. The lonely cabin was no longer lonely. Daniel helped Elias with the horses. Lily's laughter filled the mornings, and Sarah planted flowers beside the porch. The town that once whispered about them now visited their home with gifts and friendship. In time, wedding bells rang across the valley. Elias never forgot the night Sarah first appeared at his gate, freezing and afraid. He had thought he was saving a widow and 2 children from the cold. He never realized they would save him from a loneliness far deeper than winter. And Sarah learned that sometimes the greatest blessing arrives disguised as a stranger opening a door. If this story touched your heart, like this video, subscribe to Nordic Love Stories and share it with someone who believes kindness still matters. Because sometimes, one warm fire, one brave decision, and one compassionate heart are enough to change 4 lives forever.